Right, let's get this started, shall we? Welcome again to another session of site planning. I hope the site inventory exercise that I gave you last week wasn't too overwhelming. But if you do, I know it's not the I know it's not the deadline just yet. And last week I was kind of thinking whether we should we should present before we submit, but I've sort of doubled down on that. I thought no, well, they can submit first before they present. But if you do feel like you need to consult with me before you submit your work, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay. For those of you who, by the way, please do mark your attendance if you haven't done so already. And for this week, okay. Again, for those of you who've just joined in, if you have any questions if you're unsure about what you're going to report for the site inventory task before you submit it, you can consult with me once, twice, however many times you feel comfortable doing so. Otherwise, if you feel confident enough with your work, then you may submit it directly. Okay, so there's a bit of a throwback today. I know last week we sort of delved into site analysis, and I think we touched a bit on conceptual design and design development. We'll explore that a bit deeper today, but in addition to that, I'll talk a bit about programming and site selection, because this is one stage that I feel that I've left out. I know we kind of dove headfirst into site inventory, and then we had a couple of sessions on site inventory, and then we had a session or two on site analysis. But I don't think I've touched on programming and site selection, and I reckon that's a pretty crucial part. Although in practice, most of the time, the programming and site selection has been defined, or will be defined in collaboration with your client, or but I still think that you need to know a bit more about programming and site selection, because you will be doing your own site programming, and you are currently conducting a site selection for your group assignment. So the design and implementation bit we'll explore further on how to develop a conceptual design, and then how to take that conceptual design further into the design development stage. So in the conceptual design stage, the term fit is, or simply fit is quite difficult to define. What does fit? Although it's difficult to define, but like quality, you will recognize it when you see it. In some places, fit is as simple as reading the zoning and local development plans. In other communities or other sites, assessing fit can be a bit more difficult. In general, fit is determined by how the project design and function fits into local zoning, into local land development plans, and the physical aspects of the site itself, perhaps even the neighborhood and occasionally the region. And finally, fit with the values and needs of the community itself. It could be argued that that the elements that I just mentioned are listed in order of increasing difficulty for assessment and accommodation, so to say. So determining whether your project fits with local or fits into local zoning is quite easy. You just have to check the zoning codes and zoning text, local zoning codes, local zoning texts, and you can determine for yourself, or you and your team can immediately determine whether your site program or whether your concept fits the zoning program. Land development plans is quite easy as well. You just cross-check, and the physical aspects or the physical properties of the site you can determine with um, very tangible calculations, um, and you can cross-check with standards and minimum requirements that have been documented, and so it's quite easy to determine. But when it comes to community values and community needs, there isn't a one size fits all approach to it, and it may be a very iterative process where you continuously communicate with the local communities to assess whether your concept fits with their values, fits with their needs, fits into their needs. Okay. Now, when we talk about conceptual design, when you formulate conceptual design, there are three components to take into consideration: the project program itself, the community goals, if any, and of course, site suitability. And when you're formulating this conceptual design, then there are there are a few approaches in doing this, but generally you would but generally as a rule of thumb you would either design with nature or design with culture or design for people, or it could be a combination of any of those three. Now this simple rule of thumb sort of captures the essence of context sensitive site planning, and your responsiveness or the responsiveness to on-site and off-site context takes into consideration a potentially complex set of existing physical, biological, cultural, and legal conditions. The conceptual site design flows directly from the site analysis, which typically reveals biophysical, cultural, and regulatory conditions that limit the number of feasible design alternatives. Sites that have few, or if any, significant biophysical or cultural constraints are often the most challenging to design, challenging to plan. And the absence of these significant constraints allow for a much wider range of feasible options for organizing activities and designing structures on the site. Um, However, the lack of these traits or characteristics, or the lack of site character, also make it more challenging to create a unique sense of place. High quality building and site design can, however, create great places that, as on site trees grow and mature, they become even better over time. In contrast, just 2 seconds. You can just go around me, it's fine. Okay, sorry about that. I was talking about significant features, significant on-site and or off-site features. So as I mentioned, any of these unique features can help in shaping the identity of a place, and sometimes over time, if your site happens to feature or happens to have a feature that grows with that grows and develops through time, like um, like like a tree, for example. Um, On-site trees, they can grow and mature, and perhaps even grow, mature, and perhaps contribute to the site as time goes. In contrast, significant natural or cultural features on or near a site, they they have the potential to inspire context-sensitive plans that fit the site. Um, if you have a site with a large picturesque specimen tree, for example, this may limit options for site developments to locations that will protect the tree. And another example may be a stream or a body of water on the site that restricts building options to higher elevations that are not prone to flooding, and if developed, will not likely to degrade the body of water's aquatic and riparian habitats. In both scenarios, the designing with nature approach produces a more context-sensitive site plan that incorporate rather than destroy natural and cultural amenities. And context-sensitive design pretty much responds creatively to the site's existing conditions rather than forcing on the site um, rather than forcing on the site uh, generic pre-designed templates for buildings, parking lots, and other common site elements. Now, conditions that shape or inform the development of context-sensitive site plans include both intrinsic and extrinsic factors. Now, these design influences or design determinants provide the basis for organizing and articulating a project's program elements on the selected site. The project's objectives or the project program determine what is designed on the site. These objectives range from private sector real estate, um, private sector real estate development, to public sector nature conservation and or nature restoration. On projects that involve new buildings, your client may have preferences regarding architectural style and surface finishes and so on. On some projects, the future users of the site may also play a significant role in influencing the site's design. And this is particularly common with public sector projects such as parks, libraries, and schools. Site selection is or can be defined as an optimization process conducted for many purposes, including real estate development, plant and wildlife habitat restoration, farmland protection, and public open space acquisition, as the table in front of you demonstrates. Once a site is selected, its intended uses can be planned or programmed in more detail. Programming usually occurs over a range of spatial scales, from the entire site down to individual buildings. This program is usually expressed in terms of the quantity and quality of spaces needed to meet anticipated project needs. As you learn more about the site and the future users' needs and preferences, uh, this site or project program can be refined. A couple of points to remember, though. In order for you to be a successful project programmer, you should, one, communicate the proposed process to all parties involved. Two, you should not lock in preconceived solutions. So if you have a solution in mind, or if you have a solution already in mind, it's good to keep an open mind and not sort of have a tunnel vision and this is my preconceived solution. This is the best way. This is the only way we're going to go. It's my way or the highway. So you should not do that. Three, reconcile subcomponent needs with overall organizational goals and resources. And lastly, in order to be a successful programmer, you should frequently test and review design concepts as functional and space models are explored. Now, sorry about that. Hang on, just give me 2 seconds. So, project program. Programming for sites or site plans is far less detailed or far less mature than programming for buildings. This generally reflects a lack of understanding of the built environment's effects on public health, safety, and welfare, however. When designing higher density development, especially, the spaces between buildings warrant as much attention as the buildings themselves. Generally, project programming entails 4 basic steps. Initiate the project. Most of the times the client would initiate the project, but sometimes you might initiate a project and propose a project to potential clients. Develop the project's missions and objectives. In other terms, it would be mission and vision, so to say. I think that's what most people say here, vision and mission, but I think in a more international setting, it's the project mission and objectives. 3, determine the project's operational and physical requirements. In step 3, when you try to gauge a project's operational and physical requirements, you may need to research relevant standards and not so much regulations, but mostly standards for minimum service levels, and such things. And then lastly, you document and present the program to the client or to your potential client. Now, moving on to the site selection process. Um, I don't know how many of you, I don't know whether you have a site in mind already for your for your group work. However, um, and I know I think I should have mentioned this a lot earlier, um, but there are 5 or 6 steps in the site selection process. Um, project initiation. Again, the project can be initiated by your client, or you can initiate a project to you can initiate a project to sell or to convince a client, to sell to a potential client, or to convince a potential client. In our case, project was initiated in part by me and Pak Dewa. We initiated the project. We gave you a task to find a site for you to develop according to a short list of different functions, or a short list of different uses. So we've got this step out of the way. The orange boxes, or the steps, is what you need to do and what you need to determine for yourselves. First step: clarify project objectives and site requirements. Now, project objectives can vary widely among different clients, which can include public agencies, non-government organizations, and privately owned businesses. Um, depending on the function or the theme of or the development theme that you choose, your objectives can be different from the next group, and so on. In practice, public sector projects involving site selection usually includes the acquisition or development of facilities, such as, I don't know, libraries, schools, and parks. Businesses, whether they're owned by individuals or partnerships or corporations, usually engage in site selection to relocate or to expand into new markets. Virtually any type of business may engage in site selection, ranging from small retail and service sector operations to large international corporations. For a real estate development, now real estate development is another activity that regularly involves site selection. The old saying is, at this stage, would be location, location, location. Those are the 3 most important factors in real estate, or those are arguably the most important factors in real estate. Location, 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 and location has a very significant effect on property value, among other things. And for this reason, site selection is a critical step in the real estate development process. 2, choose the site selection criteria. So you know what your objectives are, and now it's time for you to come up with the site selection criteria to determine the site suitability. Site suitability is partially a function of site conditions, contextual factors, and expected costs. The site's capacity to sustain the proposed uses or activities depends in part on the site's physical conditions, which include the site area, solar access and solar exposure, and available municipal utilities and services. And site suitability is also a function of the site's social, regulatory, and environmental context. For example, the scale and architectural character of the surrounding neighborhood. And finally, site suitability depends on the specific costs and benefits of the proposed project at that site. Costs may include, for example, site acquisition, the purchasing, um, design and engineering costs, and then finally, operational and maintenance costs. Many social, economic, and environmental factors can also influence the success of a land development or land redevelopment project. Choosing an appropriate set of selection criteria will help you narrow the search and streamline the process of evaluating and comparing potential sites and ultimately selecting the best available site. Now, this process addresses three crucial issues. Capacity. Does the site provide adequate physical conditions for the project? Compatibility. Is the proposed project compatible with the surroundings? And third, affordability. Do the project's benefits outweigh its costs? And analyzing key site and key contextual attributes, or should we say threshold criteria, can make the site selection process more efficient. Frequently, a relatively small number of attributes will have a disproportionately large influence on the site selection decision. And these include essential site or contextual conditions that, if absent, exclude those sites from further consideration. On the other hand, undesirable site or contextual conditions could, if they are present, make these sites unfeasible for the program under consideration. And then we have contextual factors to think about. Access to transportation infrastructure remains a crucial or key site selection criterion for most land uses. A site's access to sufficient utility service is another important factor. These services include the delivery of potable water, electricity, natural gas, as well as the collection and treatment of wastewater. Telecommunication technologies, as we know it, greatly expands the range of suitable locations for some commercial activities. Access to high-speed internet connection is usually not ubiquitously available and may therefore be an important site selection criterion. Otherwise, you might need to provide the infrastructure for high-speed internet access or other telecommunication means. Another criterion would be visibility or visibility. So visibility to a site from adjacent streets or other off-site locations could be an asset, particularly if your project program entails retail activities or other patron-dependent businesses. Visual quality may also influence site selection decisions. Natural and cultural amenities often enhance property values and can contribute to a site's unique sense of place. Major water bodies, forests, and mountainous or hilly terrain are amenities that add value to nearby properties. To nearby properties, especially those with unobstructed views of the amenity. So, a context-sensitive approach to site selection um, also considers the compatibility of the proposed uses with the surrounding area. Step 3. Collect site data and select potential sites. On some projects, your client may identify potential sites already. They may already have a selection of different sites. In other cases, you may need to discover the potential sites yourself. Oftentimes you would employ spatial analysis techniques or spatial analysis techniques and or use geographic information systems to help you identify potential sites. Another alternative or another approach is to employ the help, or not employ, but to recruit the help of local governments, since local governments are generally very supportive of development and redevelopment projects that can add jobs and contribute to local property and sales tax revenues. So you may come and visit, talk to the local government, and present your project and see if they can help you with see if they can help you come up with site alternatives and options. They may point you in one direction or another. They may provide maps of available infill and redevelopment sites. They may point you to the direction of planning and economic development agencies that may provide other useful data about the site, including parcel area, parcel size, the available utilities, and applicable development regulations. Now that you have your site, now that you have the criteria, you've got site options. Step 4 would be to evaluate each site's suitability. Now, once you've identified the potential sites, additional data are needed to assess each site's suitability for the proposed project. Evaluating site suitability typically involves the analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data. Step 5. Rank the alternative sites and select the best one. Now, site suitability ratings can be summarized in a matrix checkbox style as either numerical or graphical values. So a site evaluation matrix usually lists potential sites and each site selection criterion. And there are no inherent limits on either the number of selection criteria or the number of sites that can be evaluated. There are practical limits, however, dictated by the time and resources available, as well as by the risks of selecting a poorly suited site. Finally, step 6, test project feasibility. So once the best site has been selected, the project's feasibility may be studied in more detail before the site is purchased and the project moves to subsequent phases of the site planning process. Whether it is a private sector or public sector project, feasibility studies examine the proposed project's costs and benefits. A project's financial feasibility is determined in part by the physical characteristics of the site and by other contextual factors, including the market for potential customers, competing projects in the area, and regulatory constraints, as well as the community's expectations and attitudes concerning land development. So I hope that sums up the site selection process in general. Let's move on to the conceptual design and design development. Problem solving is inherent to the site planning and design process. Site selection is largely an optimization problem aimed at finding an available site that can best satisfy the project's objectives. Once a site is selection, identifying its constraints and opportunities is sort of like is an effort to understand the puzzle that the site proposes, or a puzzle that the site poses for the program under consideration. Now, solutions to this puzzle are sought during the conceptual design phase and in more detail through subsequent design developments. Creative problem solving involves the pursuit of 5 things: facts, problems, ideas, solutions, and acceptance of the solutions. Now, each of these is evident in the site planning and design process. The programming and site inventory phases, for example, involve fact-finding. The site analysis assesses the site's suitability for a specific project, program, or set of objectives. Now, this assessment identifies problems and constraints and ideas or opportunities. Conceptual design and subsequent design refinement generate solutions that seek to avoid, or in some cases, overcome the site's constraints and capitalize on the site's opportunities. And these solutions are then communicated, evaluated, and if accepted by key stakeholders, they will be approved and ultimately implemented. Now, quite simply put, I think an acceptable site plan should meet at least the project objectives as defined not only by the client but also by the community, the community in which the site is located, and also meets the community goals. And these community goals are typically expressed through comprehensive plans, zoning codes, and development review standards, if any, and practices. Site planning and design involves judgment of relevance, for example, what site data to collect, and of spatial relationships, for example, how the site would affect a potential program activity. Site planning also involves acts of creating, like arranging different land uses and assessing the implications of those decisions. For example, anticipating the design's effects on pedestrians' access, comfort, and safety. If you feel that you have a very limited capacity to design, fortunately, the ability to create appropriate design solutions can be nurtured. And one of the best ways to become a better designer is to develop and to refine your design vocabulary, and to develop your design vocabulary can be done by by doing something as simple as looking at other people's designs and researching their context, and then incorporating those designs, those approaches to your own design approach, or modifying and adapting their approaches to your specific context or your specific needs. Now, the decision concerning what goes where on the site usually occurs in incremental steps. The conceptual design phase is indeed the time to explore, evaluate, and compare alternative spatial configurations. And adaptation and revisions are inherent in fitting the development program to the site. You may come up with a spatial concept diagram that arranges on the site the program's major components. The design process then moves to the more detailed design decision concerning, well, this is still far away, but concerning material selection and surface articulation and the like. This approach to site planning is efficient, effective, and quite simply put, repeatable. And to skip this conceptual design phase is to omit a very crucial step in the site planning process. Exploring alternative concepts certainly requires time, but this investment can pay substantial dividends by improving the quality of the final site plan, which ultimately impacts the character of a place, the livability and the sustainability of the built environment. And there are two important reasons to design conceptually before advancing to more detailed site design. First of all, conceptual design can be done more quickly than a detailed design. Once the program and the site are well understood, multiple concepts can be and should be developed before proceeding into a more detailed design. Secondly, conceptual design is effective even at small scales of representation, like drawings and such. So the proverbial back of the envelope concept diagram is possible because conceptual design is concerned with the bigger picture. Back of the envelope term or phrase simply means that during the conceptual design process, it is a lot easier. It is a lot easier for you to communicate simple sketches to your client rather than producing a more detailed or a more intricate drawings. A strong concept or organizing framework promotes wayfinding and creates a very strong sense of place. The conceptual design process can be, for me, it's an exhilarating period of creativity when a designer develops an organizing structure for the program that responds to the site's natural and cultural features, and providing a spatial framework for subsequent site and building designs to work on. There are three, I wouldn't say three rules of thumbs, but I would say that there are three core conceptual design principles, or three core conceptual design, oh, sorry, not principles, components: open spaces, circulations or circulatory networks, and of course buildings. These are the three most common components that can be found in any, I'm willing to bet, all site plans usually incorporate some degree of open spaces, a handful of circulation networks, and some or many, or maybe sometimes many buildings. Open spaces first. So lately, the attempt to limit urban sprawl and reduce the loss of open space has been is becoming increasingly common, and is becoming an increasingly common goal in many communities. Conservation of open spaces, especially woodlands, grasslands, wetlands, and open water, provide a range of social benefits, including opportunities for outdoor recreation. One way open spaces can be protected is through regulatory approaches that restrict development rights on lands with significant environmental resources. With skillful site planning based on a thorough site analysis, clustering buildings and infrastructure on the remaining site areas can protect environmentally sensitive areas and provide attractive settings for new development. Open spaces complemented with green infrastructure in the built environment provides, as I mentioned, many social, economic, and ecological benefits. As we learn more and more about the structure and function of ecosystems and their importance to human health, safety, and welfare, planning and design professionals are integrating more green spaces into site, neighborhood, and community plans. And both natural and developed open spaces can provide opportunities for outdoor recreation, and outdoor recreation can help foster and strengthen community identity and boost quality of life, and even serve as a catalyst or as catalysts for local economic development. Secondly, circulatory networks. When you're designing a site circulation network, you are required to have an understanding of the site's context, including the existing transportation systems and existing transportation systems adjoining the site. The entry and arrival sequence to on-site destinations must begin at one or more access points on the site's periphery. Entrances to the site and to the buildings and major pedestrian walkway intersections are places to develop plazas, squares, and seating areas. And these pedestrian nodes warrant appropriate design treatment, including maybe special paving, a certain degree of lighting, planting, and site furniture or street furniture. Circulatory network design principles include establishing gateways and creating a strong sense of arrival. Um, the primary entrance to a site, for example, could be located on axis with the proposed building or some other significant on-site or off-site feature. It acts as a visual anchor or terminus for an organizing axis. And of course, this axis that I'm talking about is an imaginary line. Um, could be a large specimen tree, a hill, a prominent landform, or other unique natural or cultural feature. Buildings. Now, if the project program calls for siting one or more new buildings, then the site analysis must identify suitable locations for building construction. And once you identify this, you can draw polygons known as developmental pods or development pods. And a development pod for a single building should be large enough to accommodate the building, along with space for parking, service areas, and pedestrian amenities. Land development projects on large sites pose very unique challenges and potential opportunities. The clustering of buildings can reduce a development's impervious surfaces and perhaps an even lower construction costs for streets, utilities, and other infrastructure. Clustering buildings can also minimize site disturbance, and if the buildings are carefully sited, they can actually help protect natural drainage networks and other natural or cultural features. These undeveloped open spaces between the building clusters can become amenities that are accessible from the buildings that are clustered on the remaining parts of the site. Finally, building siting can have a very large effect on the building's design and operation, like the amount of energy used for cooling, heating, and lighting, for example, is influenced not only by the building's design, but also by its location on the site. Seasonal wind direction and velocity, solar exposure are some of the many climatic factors that should be considered when you site a building. Now, once you got all of that, once you got most of your thought on paper, then the site plan concept needs to be reviewed, and the site plan review process usually you need to examine the potential impacts of the proposed development on public health, safety, and welfare, of course. When you're evaluating your concept, ask yourselves these 6 questions to help reflect on your concept's strengths and weaknesses. So, are the proposed site uses consistent with the parcel's existing zoning classification? If they are, good. Does the design adequately address any risks of natural hazards from flooding, erosion, slumping off steep slopes, or sandy soils, subsidence, and other natural events? If they do, good, check. If they don't, that might be a weakness that you need to address or to look deeper into. Are the proposed structures and uses located outside of wetlands, groundwater recharge areas, and floodplains? Would the project affect any endangered plant or animal habitat? Have the designers adequately considered any significant views and or unique natural features, and what do we do about them? And finally, does the proposed plan minimize negative impacts, especially noise, dust, odor, light, and vibrations on adjoining land uses? There are many times when a major construction project occurs and people around that project or people's properties around that project experience a number of disturbances. And I think one of the worst disturbances you can experience is when your house, when the walls of your house crack due to, say, pile driving activities in a nearby construction or nearby development. Now, coming into design development, when you're developing your concept, or sorry, when you're developing your concept, you're generally refining or articulating the site concept plan that spatially organizes the site's building, circulatory systems, and open spaces. Both coarse and fine-scale design decisions determine how well the new project fits its site and surroundings. And these decisions can and often do create positive as well as negative community impacts. And the growing wave of urban and suburban redevelopment, I would say, presents very unique opportunities to retrofit and to revitalize poorly designed built environments to make them more attractive, more resource efficient, and perhaps even more pedestrian friendly. And good site planning and building design can help communities, neighborhoods become better places to live, work, and even play. I'm not going to get in. I'm not going to get. I'm not going to get too deep into urban design theory in this session because we'll be exploring different urban design theories when we step in when we join the urban design units. But in a nutshell, urban design theory comprises an evolving body of ideas, principles, and techniques for designing and redesigning the built environment. Now, this normative principle are culturally influenced, and because they embody the best practices within each design field, they may change over time and with new research, with new experiences, and as economic, legal, social, or environmental conditions evolve. Design principles address not only spatial organization of the built environment, but also its spatial articulation, which includes surface finishes, such as building, cladding, and walkway pavers. Important lessons can be gleaned by critically examining examples of great design, as well as, and I think this is more important, is that you should examine design failures throughout history. So throughout the built environment, design quality influences the economic success of products, ranging from automobiles to toasters and televisions. Design quality also influences the economic value and the success of places, from individual houses or housing projects to entire neighborhoods, communities, and regions. Underlying these economic effects, of course, is the issue of individual preference. All of us have preferences that influence in one way or another our behavior, which includes where we live, where we work, where we go to school, and the places we visit, and the things that we acquire. Now, urban design theory is very concerned with form, and so that implicitly means that it is concerned with appearance. Because three-dimensional structures of the built environment affects its function. And there is a term or a phrase um, that you may already know. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It is a very well-known aphorism that is often used to argue against regulations concerned with community aesthetics. This assertion has some validity when the issue under consideration is relatively minor, for example, the color of the house. Yet, I'd say not all beholders of beauty have equivalent understanding of the importance of design to the built environment's social, economic, and even ecological functions. Clearly, the design of the built environment affects community character and determines how easy or difficult and how pleasant or unpleasant it is to live there. And as a matter of public health, safety, and welfare, therefore, mayors and other community leaders should pay close attention to the design of their built environment. Now, every built environment can be viewed as a three-dimensional design that, at its most basic sculptural level, is composed of masses and voids. And these three-dimensional compositions are defined by the ground or the floor plane and the vertical or the wall plane, and in many instances by the overhead or ceiling plane. And the spatial organization and articulation of these three planes can achieve many, many important design objectives as demonstrated in the table in front of you. For the ground plane, some of the elements that may comprise a ground plane would be pavings, ground cover plants, and the like, and ground planes and elements such as paving and ground cover plants may serve different design functions that help you orientate with the space, that help segregate one function and another, or conversely, rather than segregate, they help you link from one function to another, and sometimes even perform or sometimes even act as buffers from one activity to another. Vertical planes such as walls or imaginary walls could be building facades, building walls. They could be fences or trellises. They could be a row of trees that form an imaginary wall, and even shrubs. They serve as they can serve as an enclosure. They can help you screen and limit visibility, buffer noise and other unwanted or undesirable elements. They can serve as framing as a framing tool. They can also help orientate and provide a background. Overhead could be tree canopies, they could be shelters, awnings, arcades maybe, and pergolas. They can provide an enclosure, they can provide shading, and up to a certain extent, rain protection. Now, open space is a vital and perhaps even underappreciated component of the built environment. Outdoor space in the built environment is designed by a ground plane and to varying extents by vertical and overhead planes. Ground planes here, there's some vertical planes there, and a very visible overhead or ceiling plane here. And I would argue that many of the best designed outdoor spaces are partially enclosed by buildings, landforms, trees, or other vertical elements that define the outdoor rooms and corridors. Um, Although they may be less enclosed than indoor rooms and corridors, linked sequences of pedestrian friendly outdoor spaces can strengthen a community's sense of place and even enhance its livability. Um, and this sort of composition of the outdoor space can help shape perceptions of the built environment, and these perceptions are in part a function of how visible attributes such as color, shape, size, and texture are spatially arranged. For the sake of simplicity, enhancing the aesthetics of the built environment can be reduced to three fundamental design principles: unity, balance, and emphasis. Unity, balance, and emphasis. Open spaces in the built environment can range from relatively undisturbed conservation areas to intensely developed urban plazas, such as this. Um, Developed open spaces have both soft and hard surfaces. Now, these outdoor rooms and corridors, when they are designed to human scale and they are appropriately furnished and they link with walkways and bike paths and other non-motorized means of transportation, they enhance they enhance community livability. Public parks, waterfronts, and other open spaces are excellent sites for farmers markets, art exhibitions, musical performances, and other events that not only enhance a community's quality of life but also increase its economic competitiveness. Just to share a personal experience with this particular space, the Roma Street Parklands. Um, my children and I we participated in a local community activity called it was an attempt to break the Guinness World Records the number of people um, stargazing, the number of people stargazing through a telescope over a certain period of time. I don't really know whether we broke the record that evening or not, but it was nice to go out there with a bunch of strangers. With our telescopes and just look into the sky and enjoy whatever you can find there, the moon or whatever star it is that you can find. If your telescope is strong enough, you can see further away than that. But anyways, it was nice. I think more than 15,000 people gathered that evening to stargaze for one whole minute. Well-designed open spaces also add value to nearby real estate and provide places that enable active outdoor living. Um, Again, in the case of Roma Street Parklands, just off frame on the other side of this grass plaza is a is several apartment blocks, and they have excellent view overlooking the parklands, and especially when the parklands are lit up in the evening um, during Easter and Christmas holidays. Um, and because of the view alone, the apartments there cost significantly greater. They're significantly greater. They're significantly higher priced than other apartments in the surrounding areas. Um, so I was just talking about the positive open spaces, but there are also negative open spaces, or known also as lost spaces. Lost spaces are typically poorly defined and often neglected open spaces, and I would say these are missed opportunities to improve a community's livability. Um, if you if you find these lost spaces, then I think it is an opportunity to do something about that, and to turn it around from a lost opportunity to a site enhancing potential. Now, speaking of outdoor spaces, popular outdoor spaces, they tend to be human scaled, with moderate to strong sense of enclosure. And when these open spaces are designed exclusively for pedestrians, then usually these outdoor spaces can be very meaningful community assets. Um, last year when we last year when we just arrived back in Surabaya, uh, my children observed that my children observed the absurdly high volume of private vehicles, and one of them asked me, "Can't the government do something to limit or perhaps restrict private vehicle ownership?" And I said to him, "No, the government can't do that. The government must not do that. They must not limit." They must not limit or restrict vehicle ownership. Rather, they should provide options for options or transportation choices to the community. So that way, people can choose whether they want to travel by private vehicle, or they travel by public means of transportation, or by other means of transportation. And the key word here is choices, and livable communities provide transportation choices. You can choose to walk, you can choose to ride your bicycle, you can choose to take public transit, you can choose to drive your car or ride your motorcycle. Choose. So choices. So key design attributes include key design attributes for circulation networks, other than cramming as many choices as possible to a transportation or circulation network systems, is to also include high levels of street connectivity, short blocks, and medium density, mixed use development that are accessible to high quality transit service, if such transit service exists. Pedestrian-friendly mixed-use neighborhoods include, say, housing, shops, restaurants, and other services, as well as human-scale buildings and streetscapes. Livable communities place less emphasis on minimizing traffic, as I mentioned earlier. Not trying to minimize traffic, but to provide people with choices. And again, livable communities don't really emphasize on minimizing traffic delays or dealing with traffic jams, but they emphasize on traffic calming efforts and increasing safe and convenient transportation alternatives. Now, these livable communities, ideal livable communities, they build pedestrian and bicycle circulation networks that are separate from the motorized vehicle circulation system, such as this. Up here is the M1 is the M5 to the M1 highway. And down here is the pedestrian and bicycle lane where you ride to work, or you jog to work, or you walk to work, whichever way you like. And these circulatory networks, these non-motorized circulatory networks, have great connectivity with public transit. Just off frame there is a ferry terminal. If you get tired of running or walking or cycling, then you can catch a ferry downstream or upstream, whichever way it is you're going. In this picture here, the pedestrian network and the pedestrian and the cycling network are segregated by vegetation. Unfortunately, in some segments, both networks are very closely aligned. That it can sometimes present opportunities for conflict or friction between pedestrians and cyclists, especially mountain bikers. And so that was separate functions, separate circulation networks for different, if possible, provide separate circulation networks for different modes of transport. If not, then you can at least provide physical barriers so that those who choose to travel with non-motorized means are protected from those who travel using motorized means. And when you integrate these ideas of circulation networks with compact mixed-use neighborhoods, well-designed pedestrian and bicycle networks can reduce daily motorized vehicle trips and daily vehicle miles traveled, and ultimately reduce the polluting impacts of motorized vehicles on the environment. Lastly, buildings. And design development involves the spatial articulation or the refinement of diagrammatic conceptual site plans. And if a development pod or a scribble on a concept plan is designated as a single family housing, for example, then the next step would be to add walkways in addition to the individual building lots or parcels. And if the typical design area or the design pod will be a multifamily housing cluster, then the design development would focus on determining the size, shape, and location of the footprint for the building or the building ensemble. In the design of urban infill projects, new buildings are expected to be good neighbors and expected to fit in contextually. Now, this fitting in is often achieved by echoing the form, the bulk, scale, proportion, or other design attributes of nearby buildings, at least when the nearby buildings are well designed. Um, Articulating a building's facade or facades, it involves choices regarding materials, colors, shapes, and textures. And by echoing the attributes of well-designed precedents of well-designed buildings, other well-designed buildings in the neighborhood, in the community, or even in the region, new buildings that you're introducing can enhance both quality and distinctiveness of the local built environment, so to say. Right. So far, that is all I can say about conceptual design and conceptual design development. If anybody has any comments or any questions, you're more than welcome to immediately unmute yourself and speak your 2 cents. If anybody has any questions regarding the site inventory exercise that I distributed last week, and again, for those of you who missed the earlier the earlier session, if you just joined in, as I mentioned earlier, you're more than welcome to consult with me if you feel, if you and or your partner feel I don't know, feel that there are some things that you need to clarify regarding the site inventory exercise that I gave out last week. And I think Pat Frendika and I agreed that we would use this site inventory exercise as a substitute or as a replacement to the mid-semester exams that we normally have. So I'll have to confirm again with him on that. But again, if you'd like to consult with me prior to submitting your report and prior to presenting next week, you're more than welcome to send me a line, not line as in line application, because I have terminated my line account, but send me a line as in send me an email or send me a private message, and we can talk about your report and or your presentation. Your report is due this week, this Friday, and your presentation would ideally take place next week. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, does anybody have any questions or comments? You're more than welcome to speak your 2 cents. Otherwise, that is all. That is all from me this morning. At the moment, you may have questions arising after the session. Again, same with the consultation thing. Um, just send me a line and we can continue our discussions there. Thank you guys so much for um, thank you guys so much for attending this morning's session. And I hope that I wish you all a very, very nice day. And for those of you taking part in the whole, participating in the holy month of Ramadan, I wish you all very good health and many, many blessings. Okay, thank you all very much again, and see you next week. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning.